1 minute ago, Cassie under fire. Diddy's lawyer uses Cassie's own words against her. The federal trial against Sean Diddy Combs escalated this week as singer and former partner Cassie Ventura took the stand for her fourth consecutive day. Combs is facing charges including sex trafficking, racketeering, unlawful surveillance, and coercive control. Prosecutors allege that over more than a decade, Combs used his wealth and influence to maintain psychological and sexual control over Ventura through manipulation, abuse, and fear. In court, Cassie recounted years of encounters that she described as abusive and degrading, many of them involving what she referred to as freak-offs, sexually charged events involving third parties, drugs, and at times video recordings. The prosecution has framed these incidents as orchestrated coercion. The defense argues they were consensual acts between adults in a romantic relationship. As cross-examination began, Diddy's lead attorney, Anna Esto, moved immediately to discredit Cassie's testimony. Her opening strategy focused on presenting a large volume of text messages and emails exchanged between Cassie and Combs, many of which were explicit and appeared to show enthusiastic participation. The aim was clear: reframe the prosecution's claims of coercion as mutual consent and affection. "You were in love with Mr. Combs for 11 years, correct?" Esto asked. "In the ways I could be," Cassie replied. Several texts showed Cassie expressing romantic and sexual desires, including invitations to organize freak-offs. In one exchange, she texted, "I'm always ready for a freak-off." In another, she wrote, "Let's do a weekend so we can recover for work." Esto argued that these messages proved Cassie was a willing participant. Cassie confirmed the messages were hers, but testified that they did not reflect her actual state of mind. "Those words were just words," she told the court. "I was trying to stay safe." According to Cassie, her use of affectionate language and apparent enthusiasm in text exchanges was part of a long-standing pattern of appeasement. He expected certain responses. "If I said no, there would be consequences," she said. She described Diddy as volatile and controlling, explaining that she felt pressure to agree to his requests to avoid retaliation. In another exchange, presented by the defense, Diddy asked, "Do I have permission to set up a freak-off?" Cassie responded affirmatively. Under questioning, she explained that her consent was never freely given. "It was about managing the situation, not wanting to provoke him," she said. Esto continued to focus on inconsistencies, highlighting Cassie's earlier testimony that staff members were involved in preparing rooms for sexual encounters. On cross, Cassie stated that staff weren't aware of the specific nature of those events. When pressed, she said, "They brought what was asked for, but they didn't know what would happen after." One text exchange raised by the defense appeared to contradict Cassie's claim that she was afraid of being filmed. In it, Cassie asked if she should return to retrieve an iPad used to record sexual encounters. "I had hidden it. I forgot to bring it," she said. The defense used this to question why a victim afraid of blackmail would proactively assist in creating the material. Cassie explained that by that time, she was acting under long-term psychological pressure. "You do things just to keep things calm," she said. The prosecution objected, frequently arguing that the defense was selectively presenting messages without context. Their concern was that jurors might misinterpret Cassie's tone and intent, especially in emotionally complex or abusive relationships. Cassie's testimony also addressed issues of substance abuse. She told the jury that both she and Diddy had developed addictions, hers to opioids, his to MDMA and ecstasy. Withdrawal symptoms were severe and sometimes drove their behavior. But she emphasized, "The drugs didn't make me do anything. Fear did." Throughout the session, Cassie remained calm but visibly fatigued. She answered questions precisely and clarified her past actions as those of someone trying to survive a relationship marked by fear and power imbalance. When asked about planning role-play scenarios and visiting sex clubs, Cassie acknowledged that she participated, but said, "I did what he wanted. I didn't think I had a choice." Esto also highlighted Diddy's text messages that appeared to show deference such as asking Cassie to make decisions or expressing care. Cassie responded that these moments were rare and didn't reflect the broader pattern of control. In one such instance, Diddy asked if she was excited for a planned event. Cassie replied, "I'm too excited." In court, she explained that was about seeing him, not about what he had planned. The defense introduced evidence that Cassie sometimes purchased Oil's outfits and supplies used in the encounters. She did not dispute this, but testified that these actions were expected. "He wanted those things, so I got them," she said. In one exchange, Cassie admitted she told Diddy she missed their love sessions. She explained, "When you're trying to avoid conflict, you say things that keep the peace." The day's testimony concluded with discussion about Cassie's emotional state during their relationship. She said she felt isolated that Diddy spent holidays with his ex and children, and that she had no relationship with them. "I was with him for years and still felt like a stranger in his life," she said. The prosecution is expected to begin redirect questioning to address the perceived contradictions and add further context. Judge Subramanian has emphasized that Cassie's time on the stand will end by Friday. The outcome of this cross-examination could shape the trajectory of the entire trial. Day 5 of the trial opened with mounting tension as cross-examination of Cassie Ventura resumed. The defense maintained its aggressive strategy, focusing on reinterpreting Cassie's digital communications with Sean Diddy Combs. Their goal was to blur the line between consent and coercion, suggesting that Cassie's participation in explicit exchanges and sexual activities was voluntary. The defense emphasized messages Cassie had sent, expressing sexual interest and emotional attachment. A March 2017 exchange, read in court, had Cassie telling Diddy, "I want it to be uncontrollable." Another showed her writing, "Wish we could have freaked off before you left." Attorney Anna Esto argued that such language undermines the prosecution's claim that Cassie was acting under duress. Cassie, however, maintained that these messages were the result of a learned survival mechanism, compliance out of fear. "He didn't take no well," she said. "I did what I needed to avoid conflict." Esto then referenced a 2012 message where Cassie expressed interest in watching Diddy with another woman. Cassie confirmed the message, but described it as part of a broader pattern of emotional manipulation. "It started as a suggestion," she said, "but soon it became an expectation." The defense also showed an email from a sex club attempting to establish that Cassie was a willing participant in planning group sexual encounters. Cassie countered that the participation was conditional. "I had to stay close to him. That was the only way I felt safe," she said. In a separate message, Diddy asked, "Do I have permission to set up a freak-off?" Cassie replied, "Yes, but I'm ovulating." The defense cited this as proof of mutual agreement. Cassie clarified, "It wasn't a yes, it was a delay tactic." As questioning continued, the courtroom saw increasing emotional intensity. When Esto asked about Cassie's message saying, "I forgot the iPad," she acknowledged it referred to a device used for recording sex acts. The defense asserted that this disproved her fear of being filmed. Cassie responded firmly, "That's not the whole picture. He wanted those recordings. I just didn't want to fight." At one point, Esto asked, "If you were afraid, why continue the relationship for over a decade?" Cassie paused before answering, "Because I thought I loved him. Because he made sure I had no one else. Because when I tried to leave, he reminded me what he was capable of." The court was then presented with messages between the two referencing sex supplies, with Diddy writing, "Impress me." Cassie replied, "Trying to find something to impress you." The defense argued these were signs of romantic complicity. Cassie replied, "That was pressure. That was me avoiding his disappointment." Esto questioned Cassie's credibility further by highlighting her admitted drug use, noting that in 2017 she had lost her sense of taste and smell and experienced numbness in her arm. "You were high most of the time," Esto said. "How can you be sure of your memory?" "I remember the fear," Cassie answered. "That part's clear." The jury reacted visibly throughout the day. Several leaned forward as the text exchanges grew more explicit. Others shifted uncomfortably when Cassie described how she would heat baby oil in the sink before encounters. She said she bought the oil herself sometimes in bulk, but clarified, "That doesn't mean I wanted what happened next." Diddy's defense sought to dispel rumors that the baby oil was laced with drugs. Cassie said, "Not that I know of." Cassie testified that despite years together, Diddy spent major holidays with his ex-partner Kim Porter and their children. "I felt like a secret," she told the jury. The defense pivoted to Cassie's relationship with rapper Kid Cudi. Cassie admitted she used a burner phone to speak with him. "I was scared of what Diddy would do if he found out." She explained the secrecy wasn't about cheating, but survival. "He had freedom. I didn't." The exchange turned dark when Cassie alleged that upon learning about Kid, Cudi Diddy lunged at her with a wine opener. The defense pointed out he never made contact. "He didn't need to," Cassie said. The threat was enough. As the day closed, the prosecution prepared for redirect. Judge Subramanian reiterated that Cassie's time on the stand must conclude by the end of the week. The prosecution will now have one final opportunity to reframe the narrative before the defense continues its case. With only 1 day left for Cassie Ventura on the stand, the prosecution used its limited time for redirect to refocus the narrative, reestablishing their core argument that Cassie's behavior and language, though at times seemingly consensual, were the results of a prolonged and imbalanced power dynamic. Prosecutor Elena Walsh aimed to clarify that consent given under fear or coercion is not genuine consent. Walsh began by asking Cassie to describe how her relationship with Combs evolved from 2007 onward. Cassie explained that her music career was closely tied to Combs, who signed her to his label. "He controlled my income, my housing, my access to the industry," she said. "It wasn't just romantic. It was professional, financial, and emotional dependence." The prosecution introduced testimony and records showing that Diddy financed Cassie's living arrangements, wardrobe, and travel. In return, she was expected to be constantly available. "It was understood that if I wasn't compliant, those things could disappear," she said. To counter the defense's emphasis on Cassie's explicit messages, Walsh redirected attention to the timeline and context. She asked Cassie to explain the phrase, "I'm always ready for a freak-off." Cassie answered. That was what he wanted to hear. He made it clear what kind of girlfriend he expected. Walsh displayed messages where Cassie expressed discomfort, including one where she wrote, "Can we just chill tonight?" and received no reply. "That was my way of asking for space," Cassie said. But silence meant disapproval. The prosecution also brought up surveillance footage that allegedly showed Cassie looking visibly distressed after encounters. While the defense had argued that the videos were inconclusive, Walsh suggested they supported Cassie's version of events. "She looks scared, she looks depleted," Walsh told the jury. More testimony focused on the psychological patterns of the relationship. Cassie described cycles of affection followed by aggression. He'd plan a birthday party with celebrities, then the next week, scream at me for speaking to the wrong person, she said. It was emotional whiplash. Jurors were shown a sequence of emails in which Cassie asked to take a break from their relationship and was met with a barrage of calls and messages. One message from Combs read, "If I don't have you, I have nothing." Walsh then highlighted a 2016 incident in which Cassie allegedly tried to leave the relationship. She packed bags and booked a flight. He found out and canceled the flight, she testified. Then he called every hour until I answered. To reinforce the theme of control, the prosecution introduced financial records, showing Cassie's dependence on Combs for personal expenses even years into the relationship. She said he wanted to make sure I needed him. That way I wouldn't leave. As redirect continued, Walsh turned the jury's attention to Cassie's current condition, nearly 9 months pregnant and still under oath. "She's not here for money," Walsh said. "She's here because she wants the truth on record." Cassie was then asked about Diddy's public gestures during court, his signature hand hearts, to the audience, his calm demeanor, and his attention to reporters. "That's who he wants you to see," she said. "It's not who he was behind closed doors." The prosecution also clarified the role of third parties in the so-called freak-offs. Earlier inconsistencies were addressed by showing receipts and communications from hotel staff tasked with preparing rooms. Cassie testified they didn't know everything, but they were instructed to bring items and set up the space. To close the redirect, Walsh asked, "Why did you stay?" Cassie's response was direct, "Because I didn't know how to leave. Because I thought it would be worse if I tried." Judge Subramanian instructed the jury to consider the entire body of evidence, not just isolated messages or exchanges. With Cassie's testimony concluded, the focus now turns to the defense's witnesses and how they will attempt to dismantle the prosecution's case. With Cassie Ventura off the stand, the defense began presenting its witnesses, shifting the trial's focus toward Sean Diddy Combs' version of events. The aim to dismantle the narrative of coercion, reframe the relationship as consensual, and challenge Cassie's credibility. Lead defense attorney Anna Esto called to the stand several former employees and associates of Combs, individuals who worked closely with him and Cassie during the years in question. First was Marcus Taylor, a former tour manager for Combs, who testified that he had seen Cassie and Diddy together often and never observed behavior he would describe as abusive. "They seemed like a normal couple," he said. "Arguments, sure, but nothing violent." Taylor acknowledged seeing preparations for some of the encounters described by Cassie: candles, oils, condoms, but maintained he never witnessed or suspected coercion. Under cross-examination, however, he admitted that he rarely interacted with them behind closed doors and did not have access to private spaces. Next, the defense brought in Jasmine Ortega, a former executive assistant who stated she often booked hotel rooms and handled logistics for Combs' travel. "Yes, I purchased items like baby oil or candles," she said, "but I never knew what they were used for." When asked by the prosecution whether she ever felt pressure from Combs, Ortega hesitated before responding. "He had a strong personality. But no, I wouldn't say coercion." The momentary pause was noted by courtroom observers. Then came a pivotal moment, the testimony of Quincy Combs, Diddy's son. Quincy described Cassie as like family, and said he never saw anything alarming during the time she spent with them. "She laughed, joked, took pictures with us. She was a part of our holidays," he testified. When the prosecution pressed him on whether his father's temper ever surfaced, Quincy replied, "He could get intense, but he wasn't a monster." To further bolster their argument, the defense submitted more messages and videos showing seemingly affectionate moments, Cassie smiling on private jets at parties and luxury stores. The courtroom watched a video from 2015 in which Cassie toasted Diddy at a private dinner, saying, "You changed my life. I love you." The defense argued that such public affirmations were incompatible with the narrative of prolonged abuse. The prosecution countered that emotional control often masks itself in appearances. "What she said in public doesn't invalidate what she suffered in private," Walsh argued. The defense then attempted to challenge Cassie's reliability, citing her drug use and inconsistencies in her statements. They introduced medical documents showing multiple prescriptions for painkillers and anti-anxiety medications. Dr. Stephen Hall, an expert witness in forensic psychology, testified that prolonged substance use can impair memory and emotional regulation. However, under cross-examination, Dr. Hall conceded that trauma survivors can have fragmented memories but still be truthful. The presence of drugs doesn't automatically imply deception, he acknowledged. In a strategic move, Esto returned to the 2017 exchange, where Cassie asked if she should retrieve the iPad used to film sexual encounters. "This doesn't sound like a woman living in fear," she said. Walsh objected, arguing the question lacked context. The objection was sustained. In one of the most emotionally charged segments of the day, the defense played audio of Cassie and Diddy laughing during a vacation in the Bahamas. The sound of their voices filled the courtroom. Esto turned to the jury and asked, "Does this sound like abuse?" The prosecution reminded the court that abuse does not always look like fear and sadness. Control can be smiling through silence, Walsh said. A victim does what they must to survive. As the day ended, it was clear the defense had gained ground. Their witnesses' documents and audiovisual exhibits planted seeds of doubt crucial in a case where reasonable doubt is all it takes. But the prosecution still had one more card to play. After days of calculated defense testimony and crossfire rebuttals, the prosecution returned to court with a new strategy. This time, they introduced a key witness that neither the defense nor the public anticipated: a former Combs security contractor, known only as Witness A. His identity was protected under sealed testimony, and the courtroom was partially cleared to maintain confidentiality. Witness A, a man in his mid-40s with nearly a decade of experience in private protection, testified via remote video. Under questioning from prosecutor Elena Walsh, he confirmed having worked on Combs' personal security detail from 2012 to 2018. I was part of the team that oversaw logistics safety and travel support, he said. When asked if he had ever observed behavior that gave him concern, his tone shifted. There were times when I was instructed to clear entire floors of hotels, he said. Not just for privacy, but to keep others from witnessing what went on inside. Walsh leaned into the moment. Were you ever aware of what was happening behind those closed doors, she asked. We weren't told, he said. But I saw Cassie leave rooms in tears more than once. I heard screaming. He also testified that Cassie was never allowed to use private transport without prior approval. Her movements were monitored. If she wanted to go somewhere alone, it needed to be cleared by Mr. Combs or someone close to him. Defense attorney Anna Esto objected repeatedly, questioning the credibility of the anonymous witness and the admissibility of his testimony. Judge Subramanian overruled, citing relevance and corroboration with other records. The prosecution then introduced internal emails and texts corroborating Witness A's claims. One message from a Combs executive assistant read, "Please make sure she doesn't leave the suite until Sean is back. We had a misunderstanding last time." Cassie's attorneys argued this directly supported the coercion narrative. You cannot claim this was a free and equal relationship if one party's freedom of movement was monitored and restricted, Walsh said to the jury. To reinforce the emotional tone, the prosecution brought in a clinical psychologist who had reviewed years of Cassie's communication and behavior. Dr. Nadine Reller described the classic symptoms of trauma bonding. Victims of long-term manipulation often express affection for their abuser, she said. That doesn't negate the abuse, it defines it. As the defense pushed back, trying to reassert their narrative of a willing participant in an unconventional relationship, cracks began to appear. The jury's demeanor shifted. Fewer glances were directed at the defense table. Questions during breaks from alternates hinted at growing unease. Further damage came when the prosecution called a forensic tech analyst who had reviewed metadata from Cassie's phone and DIDDY'S server backups. The expert testified that some messages presented by the defense as evidence of mutual affection were selectively cropped. The original threads, when restored in full, revealed moments of conflict and silence that had been omitted. This wasn't cherry-picking, said Walsh. It was redaction with intent. Esto struggled to recover, arguing that the defense had relied on data supplied by Combs' team, not knowingly altered material. But the impact on the jury was done. It wasn't just Cassie's word anymore, it was evidence, records, experts, witnesses from within DIDDY'S inner circle. Courtroom observers noted a noticeable shift in tone. By the end of the day, Walsh addressed the jury once more. This case is not about celebrity. It's not about fame or money. It's about control. Psychological, emotional, and physical control exerted over a woman who couldn't walk away without fear. With closing arguments approaching, the prosecution's momentum had returned. What started as a potential collapse of their case was now shaping into a crescendo. By the time closing arguments began, the courtroom was operating under a heightened sense of tension. The jury, once passive, now attentive, prepared to receive the final narratives from both sides. It was a case built not on a single moment of violence, but on years of emotional dynamics, power imbalances, and contrasting testimonies. Prosecutor Elena Walsh was first to deliver her closing. She spoke deliberately, building from foundation to peak. This case is not about how much Cassie Ventura loved Sean Combs. It's about how much control he had over her. She opened. Walsh reminded jurors that control can be silent, manipulative, and embedded in routines. He didn't need to raise his hand every day. He created an environment where she had to ask permission just to move. She walked the jury through the major evidence points, witness A's sealed testimony, the internal messages that monitored Cassie's movement, the selectively redacted texts, the metadata corrections by forensic analysts, and Cassie's own 4-day testimony under oath while pregnant. Walsh ended with this: "The defense says she consented. We say she survived. The law doesn't require bruises to prove coercion. It requires evidence of power abused. You have that evidence." Defense attorney Anna Esto stood for the final time, calm and composed. What we saw here was a relationship with complications no doubt she began, but not a crime. She argued that both parties engaged in behavior, willingly, even enthusiastically at times. She reminded the jury of Cassie's affectionate messages, the vacation videos, and the lack of a police report during the time of the alleged coercion. "Ask yourself this," Esto said. "Do you convict a man based on words written in love? Do you call it abuse when both sides wrote the script, but cracks remained?" Esto struggled to reframe the forensic testimony, acknowledging that some digital threads may have been incomplete, but insisting they were never intentionally altered. Her attempt to downplay the iPad incident that Cassie offered to retrieve a device used to film encounters came under silent scrutiny from the jury. With arguments concluded, the judge issued instructions to the jury: weigh the evidence, ignore celebrity, and focus solely on the facts presented. They were sequestered immediately. Outside the courtroom, the case had already become a national flashpoint. Advocacy groups called it a landmark trial for survivor testimony in cases involving high-profile abusers. Diddy's legal team remained quiet, offering only a brief statement, reaffirming their client's innocence. As deliberations began, insiders speculated on possible outcomes: a hung jury, a partial verdict, a full acquittal, a conviction. Every possibility carried immense consequence. Cassie Ventura was not seen after her final day on the stand. Her attorneys said she was advised to rest until the verdict. Observers noted the public's reaction to her case, many praising her composure and bravery, while others remained skeptical due to the complexity of the relationship described. Back in the jury room, 12 individuals carried the weight of determining whether the evidence rose to the level of criminal conduct, or whether it was the story of a broken but lawful relationship. Whatever the verdict, the trial had already made history. It exposed the mechanisms of control that can exist without overt violence, and it forced a courtroom and a country to ask harder questions about consent power and accountability. Verdict pending. As the public continues to dissect every detail of the trial, attention has increasingly turned not just to Sean Combs, but to his children, especially Quincy and Christian Combs. The two sons were present throughout much of the proceedings, sitting behind their father in court, often solemn and unreadable. But their presence, their proximity, and in Quincy's case, his testimony, placed them squarely within the broader conversation. Quincy Combs, in particular, offered defense testimony that cast Cassie as an accepted member of the family. He spoke of holidays, private parties, and moments of joy. What he did not acknowledge, and what jurors and the public could not ignore, was the deeper context that emotional abuse, manipulation, and coercion are rarely visible to outsiders, especially those within a family structure where loyalty to the patriarch runs deep. The question now isn't whether Quincy or Christian knew everything. It's what role they will play moving forward in reconciling the public image of their father with the allegations made under oath. Quincy, whose biological father is the late Al B. Sure, but who was raised by Combs, has long been positioned as part of a showbiz dynasty. So too Christian Diddy's biological son with Kim Porter, who is following in his father's musical footsteps. But can legacy thrive without accountability? For a generation raised in the shadow of immense privilege, fame, and influence, the moral compass becomes more than a private guide. It becomes a public question. Will they acknowledge the painful complexities of what unfolded, or will they stand behind the convenient image of a father misunderstood? So far, there has been no direct statement from either son about the allegations, but silence in this moment will not be interpreted as neutrality. In an era where platforms are power choosing not to speak can be as loud as any testimony. If this case has revealed anything, it's that image management cannot erase behavior patterns. Whether or not Diddy is found guilty, his family faces an unavoidable reckoning. For Quincy and Christian, how they confront this chapter, whether through acknowledgement, distance, or defense, will help define the next stage of their lives. Not just as sons of a music mogul, but as men expected to stand for something more. Legacy isn't inherited, it's earned. And in the aftermath of this trial, the world is watching to see what they choose to build.